Hello everyone, a vast ancient library, its shelves stretching into darkness, where a single reader sits, illuminating a complex, hand-drawn map of an unknown land. Let us have the courage to face a truth, deep within our psyche, unconscious. Patterns of thought and habits are silently shaping us, at times becoming the very shackles that imprison our infinite potential. This is the shadow we rarely dare to look upon. Before embarking on this journey into the depths, if you feel a resonance, a call from within, and wish to travel further down this path, please take a moment to express that connection by liking and subscribing. And now, let us find a space of stillness, with only the light from within. Together, we begin the voyage into our inner world. There are moments in life, not loud or dramatic, but quiet and profound, when we cross an invisible threshold. It is a point of no return, a silent, irreversible transformation where the life we once knew becomes a foreign country. The old habits, the familiar beliefs, the comfortable patterns that once held us together begin to fray, losing their meaning, their power. This is not a sign of failure. It is the first tremor of a deep awakening. It is the soul's signal that it can no longer live the way it used to. This feeling, this pervasive yet often unspoken malaise, is a silent epidemic of the modern age. It is the sense of being fundamentally stuck, of living a life that, despite all outward markers of success, feels hollow, misaligned, and deeply inauthentic. It is the quiet desperation of the high achiever who feels like an actor in their own life. The gnawing emptiness of the person who has everything and yet feels nothing. This is more than just a bad mood or a phase. It is a spiritual problem, a loss of soul, as the great Swiss psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung would call it. It is a profound disconnection from the core of our being. A schism between the life we are living and the life that is waiting to be lived through us, we are told. To push through, to optimize, to hustle harder. We are given 5-step plans to cure our burnout and 10-point checklists for happiness. But what if the problem isn't that we are broken, but that we are breaking free? What if this feeling of being stuck is not a cage, but a chrysalis? What if the hollowness we feel is not an absence, but an opening, a sacred space, being cleared for something truer to emerge? The structures that once provided safety, our careers, our social roles, our ideologies, can begin to feel like prisons. The answers that once satisfied us now seem superficial. An inner discomfort, a feeling that something vital is missing, becomes a constant companion. This is the soul's cry for a life of deeper meaning, even if it means walking into the terrifying unknown. This is the first sign that you have crossed a threshold. This journey we are about to embark on is a cartography of that unknown land. It is an exploration of the vast, mysterious, and powerful inner world that Carl Jung dedicated his life to mapping. We will not be offering simple fixes or easy answers. Instead, we will be providing a compass and a lamp, tools forged by Jung, to navigate the depths of the human psyche. We will explore his revolutionary ideas, the shadow, the archetypes, the collective unconscious, and the lifelong process of individuation, not as abstract theories, but as living realities that hold the key to our own transformation. So, the core question we must face is this: how do we answer the soul's call? When the life we have built no longer fits the person we are becoming, how do we find the courage to let it crumble? How do we navigate the darkness of the unknown to find the light of our own authentic truth? This is not just a psychological question, it is the great spiritual quest of our time, and the journey to its answer begins now. Before we descend into the depths of the psyche, we must first understand the landscape of our common reality. We live in a world that has an answer for everything, especially our discontent. The feeling of being hollow, of being misaligned, is given a diagnosis. It is called burnout. It is called depression. It is framed as a personal failure, a chemical imbalance, a lack of productivity that must be managed and corrected. We are told we are not sleeping enough, not eating the right superfoods, not practicing enough mindfulness, not being grateful enough for what we have. The modern world, with its emphasis on scientific rationalism and measurable outcomes, treats the soul's suffering as a mechanical problem. Burnout, from this perspective, is simply a matter of overwork, a depletion of physical and mental resources that can be fixed with a vacation, a digital detox, or a new time management strategy. And so we try. We optimize our schedules, we download meditation apps, we go on yoga retreats, we strive to become more efficient, more resilient, more positive. Yet, for many, the feeling persists. The hollowness remains. This is because the common diagnosis misses the true cause. From a Jungian perspective, burnout is not merely the result of working too hard. It is a symptom of a profound inner conflict, a protest from the soul. It is the psyche's self-regulating mechanism kicking in, forcing a shutdown because the life path we are on is leading us further and further away from our true nature. It is a collapse of psychic energy, or what Jung called libido, which recedes from the conscious ego because its fundamental needs are being starved. This happens when we become pathologically over-identified with our persona, the social mask we wear to fit in, to be successful, to be accepted. We pour all our energy into polishing this mask: the perfect employee, the ideal parent, the successful entrepreneur, while our authentic self, with its unique values and creative impulses, is neglected and left to atrophy in the darkness. The exhaustion of burnout is the soul pulling the emergency brake on a life lived for external validation. This relentless pressure to conform to an external ideal is amplified by the structure of modern mass society. Jung astutely observed that the rise of the mass state, with its focus on statistical averages and bureaucratic management, inherently diminishes the value and moral responsibility of the individual. We become, in his words, a mere abstract number in the Bureau of Statistics, an interchangeable unit of infinitesimal importance. This fosters a deep-seated feeling of insignificance and powerlessness. The psyche, in its innate drive for balance, cannot tolerate this vacuum. It compensates for the conscious feeling of weakness with an unconscious and often overwhelming hunger for power. If this drive is not made conscious and integrated in a healthy way, through the development of genuine self-knowledge and personal competence, it becomes a dangerous autonomous force. This unacknowledged hunger for power can manifest in two primary pathological ways. It can implode inward, fueling the frantic perfectionistic striving of the persona that leads directly to burnout. Or, it can explode outward. Feeling personally impotent, the individual projects their hunger for power onto a collective ideology, a mass movement, or the abstract idea of the state. By identifying with this larger-than-life entity, they gain a vicarious sense of power and purpose, but at the terrible cost of their individuality and critical thought. Here we see that personal burnout and political fanaticism are two sides of the same psychological coin. Both are desperate pathological attempts to find meaning in a world that has stripped it from the individual. One is an implosion of psychic energy, the other an explosion. Both stem from the same root cause, a profound alienation from one's own authentic inner source of meaning. This was the great spiritual problem of modern man that Jung identified, a problem born from the erosion of the traditional symbolic and religious frameworks that once connected the individual to a larger cosmic narrative. When the gods were dethroned, their archetypal energies did not vanish. As Jung warned, they became diseases. Our neuroses, our anxieties, our collective hysteriases are the symptoms of gods living in our unconscious, unrecognized, and untended. Common reality, therefore, is one of profound psychic dislocation. We are encouraged to live on the surface, to perfect our masks, and to treat our soul sickness with superficial remedies. We are caught between the isolating exhaustion of burnout and the seductive pull of mass movements that promise purpose, but demand our souls. We are, in essence, living in a world that is profoundly alienated from the very depths that give life meaning. To find a way out, we cannot look to the systems that created the problem. We must look inward, to the one who first dared to map this treacherous, forgotten territory. To find the antidote to our modern alienation, we must journey back in time, to the life of the man who first diagnosed the condition, Carl Gustav Jung was not a theorist in an ivory tower. His psychology was forged in the crucible of his own intense, often perilous, life experience. Born in 1875 in a small Swiss village, he was the son of a Protestant pastor, a kind but conventional man whose faith seemed to Jung to be a hollow shell of dogma, devoid of living spirit. This early disillusionment with established religion planted a seed. His mother, in stark contrast, was an eccentric, intuitive woman who claimed to commune with spirits. Exposing the young Jung to the mysterious numinous and often frightening side of life, he was a solitary child who felt from a young age that he possessed two personalities: the ordinary schoolboy of his time, and a wise, authoritative old man from centuries past, an early glimpse of what he would later call the self. His path led him to medicine and then to psychiatry, where he took a post at the renowned Berg-Holzli Hospital in Zurich, under the great Eugene Bleuler. It was here that Jung conducted his famous word association experiments. He noticed that certain words would cause patients to hesitate or show strong emotional reactions, revealing what he termed complexes, emotionally charged clusters of ideas and memories in the unconscious. This work provided some of the first empirical evidence for the hidden architecture of the psyche and brought him to the attention of the man who dominated the field, Sigmund Freud. Their first meeting in Vienna in 1907 was legendary, a conversation that lasted for 13 uninterrupted hours. Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, saw in the brilliant young Jung a non-Jewish heir who could carry his new science beyond its Viennese circle, anointing him his crown prince. For 5 years, they were intellectual titans in close collaboration, but a chasm was destined to open between them. Jung could not accept Freud's insistence that all neurosis, and indeed all human motivation, was rooted in repressed sexuality. His own clinical work and his own inner life pointed to a psychic reality that was far broader, more symbolic, and more mysterious. Jung proposed that libido was not just sexual energy, but a generalized psychic life force. And most critically, he dared to suggest that beneath the personal unconscious, the reservoir of an individual's own repressed memories lay a deeper, more ancient layer. He saw that the symbols and myths from cultures all over the world, many with no possible contact, shared astonishing similarities. This pointed to a shared psychic inheritance, a universal foundation of the human mind, which he termed the unconscious. This was heresy to Freud. The final break came with Jung's 1912 publication of Psychology of the Unconscious, which directly challenged Freud's core tenets. The separation was absolute and painful, leaving Jung an outcast, professionally isolated and adrift. This schism was more than a theoretical disagreement. It was a necessary, archetypal act for Jung to explore the spiritual and symbolic dimensions of the soul. He had to break free from the reductive, patriarchal dogma of his mentor. It was a hero's journey, leaving the known world to discover a truth uniquely his own. What followed this break was the most pivotal period of Jung's life. From 1913, on the eve of the Great War, he entered a state of profound inner turmoil. Ostracized and unmoored, he was besieged by a flood of powerful, terrifying visions and fantasies. He feared he was on the brink of psychosis. Here, in an open academic debate that continues to this day, some scholars and biographers have characterized this period as a psychotic episode, while others, following Jung's own view, see it as a courageous and deliberate creative illness. Jung himself made a heroic choice. Instead of repressing the onslaught from his inner world, he decided to turn and face it. He began what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, a methodical, voluntary descent into the depths of his own soul. He meticulously documented this journey in a series of journals, and then transcribed them into a large, red leather-bound manuscript filled with his own intricate calligraphy and stunning, symbolic paintings. This became the legendary Liber Novus, or the Red Book. For 16 years, he worked on this secret book, which was not published until nearly 50 years after his death. During this time, he developed his key method, olfactive imagination, a technique of entering a waking dream state, to consciously dialogue with the figures emerging from his unconscious. He spoke with Philemon, a wise old man with wings who became his guru. With Salome, a beautiful blind girl, and a host of other figures, he understood them not as hallucinations, but as personifications of the archetypes, autonomous psychic realities from the collective unconscious. The Red Book is the raw source material for his entire life's work. All his major concepts, archetypes, the shadow, the anima and animus, the self, and the central process of individuation were not intellectual speculations. They were born from the direct, lived, and often terrifying experiences he chronicled in its pages. He later said that everything he did afterward was merely the scientific elaboration of what had burst forth from the unconscious during this period. He had not just theorized about the soul, he had journeyed into its territory and returned with a map. From his harrowing descent and courageous return, Jung brought back a foundational principle, a central concept that illuminates the entire human journey. It is the aha moment of his psychology, the answer to the spiritual problem of modern life. This principle is individuation. Individuation is the central lifelong process of becoming your true, whole, and authentic self. It is the journey of self-realization, but not in the way our culture typically defines it. It is not about self-improvement, or becoming a better version of yourself. It is about becoming more fully yourself. Jung saw individuation as an innate, natural process, a teleological drive within the psyche to move toward integration and wholeness. Just as an acorn is driven to become an oak tree, the blueprint for your unique wholeness, your most authentic self, is already present within you, latent and waiting to unfold. The goal of this great work is not perfection, which is an impossible and even undesirable ideal. The goal is wholeness. And wholeness, crucially, means embracing and integrating all aspects of your personality, the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the dark, the masculine and the feminine, the parts you like and the parts you despise. It is the courageous act of saying yes to the totality of your being. It is vital to distinguish individuation from the modern cult of individualism. Individuation is not about egocentricity, selfishness, or isolating yourself from the collective. In fact, it is the exact opposite. It is a profound paradox. By becoming more uniquely and authentically yourself, you simultaneously become more deeply connected to all of humanity. The journey inward does not lead to isolation. It leads to the collective unconscious, to the universal archetypal patterns that we all share. You discover that your most personal struggles are also the most universal human dramas, played out in countless myths and stories across millennia. You realize your unique life is a thread in a vast, magnificent tapestry. Jung observed that this process often takes center stage in the second half of life. The first half is necessarily focused on external adaptation. We build our egos, we establish our personas, we learn the rules of society, we build careers and families, we adapt to the outer world. But then, often around midlife, a shift occurs. The soul calls for a turn inward. The questions change from what does the world demand of me, to what does my soul demand of me. The focus shifts from building a life to discovering its meaning. This framework radically recontextualizes psychological suffering. From a Jungian perspective, neurosis or anxieties, depressions, addictions, our feelings of being stuck and meaningless is not an illness to be cured or a malfunction to be fixed. A neurosis is a purposeful signal from the psyche. It is a sign that the natural, innate process of individuation has been blocked, resisted, or ignored by the conscious ego. The psyche wants to become whole, but the ego, conditioned by society, and driven by fear, often clings desperately to a narrow, one-sided, and ultimately unfulfilling way of being. This creates a profound tension between the conscious will and the unconscious drive toward wholeness. This unresolved conflict is the neurosis. The pain, the anxiety, the depression, these are the symptoms of the ego fighting against the soul's forward movement. They are the friction burns caused by resisting your own becoming. Therefore, the goal is not to silence the symptom, but to listen to it. The neurosis is a message from the depths. It is pointing to the parts of yourself that have been neglected, the potentials that have been left undeveloped, the wholeness that is calling to you. The pain is not a curse. It is a sacred wound. It is the call to adventure, an invitation to finally embark on the journey you were born to make, the journey home to yourself. To understand how individuation works in practice, we must deconstruct its core components. The journey to wholeness is not a vague spiritual aspiration. It is a structured psychological process involving a conscious encounter with the great archetypes that form the very architecture of our psyche. First, we must refine our map of the mind. Jung saw the psyche as having 3 layers. At the top is consciousness, with the ego at its center, our sense of I, the organizer of our waking life. Beneath this lies the personal unconscious, a repository unique to each of us, containing our forgotten memories, subliminal perceptions, and repressed experiences. But Jung's greatest discovery was the 3rd deepest layer, the collective unconscious. This is not personal. It is a universal, inherited psychic foundation shared by all of humanity. A reservoir of primordial patterns and images passed down from our most ancient ancestors. The contents of this collective realm are the archetypes. Archetypes are not specific ideas or images, but universal, innate predispositions to experience the world in typically human ways. They are the blueprints for the great motifs of life: the hero, the great mother, the trickster, the wise old man. The fact that these same patterns appear in the myths, religions, and fairy tales of cultures that never had contact is the primary evidence for their existence. The individuation journey is a pilgrimage to meet these gods within. The first figure we must confront on this path is the persona. Named for the masks of ancient Greek actors, the persona is our social face, the collection of roles we play to function in society. It is a necessary compromise between our inner self and the outer world. The danger is not in having a persona, but in mistaking it for who we truly are. When we over-identify with our mask, our life becomes a performance, and we feel like a fraud. The first step of individuation is the painful cracking of this mask. The realization that we are more than the part we play. When the persona cracks, we inevitably meet what it was designed to hide: the shadow. The shadow is the dark side of our personality, containing all the qualities we have repressed because they were deemed unacceptable, immoral, or simply inconvenient. It is everything we are convinced we are not. Jung called the confrontation with the shadow the apprentice piece of the inner journey, a difficult but essential task. If the shadow remains unconscious, it doesn't disappear. It gets projected. We see our own disowned greed, anger, or laziness in others, leading to endless conflict and moral hypocrisy. Integrating the shadow means withdrawing these projections and admitting that we too have a dark side. This act alone gives a person psychological substance and depth. It is crucial to remember the shadow is not purely evil. It can also contain positive, undeveloped potentials: our creativity, our spontaneity, our assertiveness that were suppressed for being too much for our family or culture. After grappling with the personal darkness of the shadow, the journey leads to a deeper, more subtle encounter with the Anima or Animus. These are the contrasexual archetypes. The Anima is the unconscious feminine principle in a man's psyche, and the Animus is the unconscious masculine principle in a woman's. This is our soul image, the inner figure that connects us to the collective unconscious and is the source of our creativity, our capacity for relationship, and our spiritual life. Jung considered this the masterpiece of individuation. If unconscious, the Anima can make a man moody and irrational, while the Animus can make a woman's opinions rigid and dogmatic. Integrating this archetype brings profound psychological balance and depth. There is a strict and necessary order to these encounters. One cannot bypass the shadow to get to the soul. A man who has not done his shadow work will project a contaminated Anima. He will fall in love with an idealized goddess, but because this projection is infused with his own unacknowledged darkness, he will inevitably become disillusioned, and his goddess will transform into a devouring witch. He isn't relating to a real person, but to a volatile mix of his own inner contents. Therefore, the moral courage to own one's shadow is the non-negotiable price of admission for a mature relationship with one's own soul, and, by extension, with others. The final and all-encompassing archetype, the true goal of the journey, is the self. The self is the archetype of wholeness, the central organizing principle of the entire psyche, encompassing both conscious and unconscious realms. The ego is the center of consciousness, but the self is the center of the total personality. If the ego is the earth, the self is the sun. Individuation is the process of the ego, realizing it is not the center of the universe and establishing a conscious working relationship with this greater, transpersonal intelligence within. The self is the God within us, the source of our deepest wisdom and our ultimate guide to a life of meaning. It is the voice of your own unique destiny, calling you home. The journey of individuation is not a passive process of waiting for enlightenment to strike. It is an active, practical engagement with the unconscious. Jung, the consummate empiricist, provided a set of powerful tools for establishing this vital dialogue. These are not techniques for controlling the psyche, but for listening to it, for learning its language, and for co-creating a more whole and conscious life. The first and most fundamental tool is dream analysis. For Jung, dreams were not, as Freud believed, clever disguises for repressed sexual wishes. They were direct, honest, and purposeful communications from the unconscious. Dreams, he argued, serve a compensatory function. They show us what our conscious attitude is missing, striving to bring our psyche back into balance. If your conscious life is overly rigid and intellectual, your dreams may be wild and emotional. The dream is the soul's nightly course correction. The Jungian approach to interpretation begins with recording the dream in meticulous detail, the plot, the characters, the setting, and especially the feeling. But the core of his method is samplification, which stands in stark contrast to Freud's free association. Free association leads the dream away from the dream image in a chain of personal thoughts, which Jung felt often missed the dream's specific message. Amplification, however, stays with the dream image, enriching it by weaving a web of associations around it. This involves exploring the image on three levels. Personal, what does this symbol mean to me? Cultural, what does it mean in my society, in folklore? And archetypal, where does this symbol appear in world mythology? By amplifying the image, we don't reduce it to a single meaning. We allow its full symbolic power to resonate, revealing its message within the context of our life. This method reflects a profound trust in the unconscious as a source of wisdom, not just a seller of problems. While dreams are spontaneous gifts from the night, Jung developed a second, more deliberate, tool for engaging the inner world: active imagination. This is the practice of inducing a waking dream, of consciously entering into a dialogue with the figures of the unconscious. It is the very method Jung used to navigate his own descent and create the Red Book. The process begins by focusing on a piece of unconscious material, dream image, a persistent mood, a fantasy, and allowing it to take on a personified form. Then, with a strong ego as an anchor, you begin to interact with it. You can speak to it, write down the dialogue, paint it, or even dance its energy. The key is to allow the unconscious figure its autonomy, to let it speak and act freely, while the conscious ego maintains its own standpoint and engages in a genuine, honest exchange. This leads to the most crucial part of the practice, the ethical confrontation. You must bring your real moral self to the table. You cannot lie to or manipulate the figures of your own psyche. When your personified rage demands destruction, you must listen to its energy but also argue for a constructive path. This is the crucible where psychological integration is forged. It transforms you from a passive victim of your moods and impulses into a conscious, responsible participant in your own psychic life. It is a moral training ground where you learn to negotiate with the powerful forces within, rather than being possessed by them. A third powerful tool is creative expression, most notably through the creation of mandalas. A mandala, Sanskrit for circle, is an archetypal symbol of wholeness, order, and the self. Jung discovered that these circular or squared images would appear spontaneously in his patients' dreams and art, especially during times of psychic chaos and transformation. He began drawing them himself daily, finding the practice had a profound centering and therapeutic effect. The act of creating within the severe pattern of a circle helps to contain and organize the psyche's chaotic contents, providing stability and a connection to an inner center. The spontaneous emergence of a mandala is a profoundly hopeful sign from the unconscious. It is a message that, despite the conscious turmoil, the psyche's own self-healing, ordering principle, the self is active and at work, guiding the process toward wholeness from the depths. These tools, dream, analyses, active imagination, and creative expression, are the practical first steps on the inner path. They are the means by which we learn to listen to the soul, honor its wisdom, and actively participate in our own becoming. The path of individuation is not a gentle, sunlit stroll. It is a heroic and often tragic task, a journey into the wilderness of the soul that is fraught with obstacles and perils. To pretend otherwise is to engage in a dangerous form of spiritual bypassing. The ego does not surrender its dominion easily, and the unconscious does not yield its treasures without a test of courage and integrity. There are three great obstacles that every traveler on this path must face. The first and most formidable is the confrontation with the shadow. Jung called this the first test of courage on the inner way, a trial so unpleasant that it frightens off the vast majority of people. To truly see your shadow is to acknowledge your own capacity for everything you condemn in others: your egotism, your cruelty, your cowardice, your greed. It is a deeply humbling and painful blow to the ego's cherished self-image, but avoiding this confrontation is far more dangerous. An unacknowledged shadow becomes a black and dense snag in the psyche, thwarting our best intentions and leading to self-sabotage. It operates autonomously, possessing us through irrational moods and compulsive behaviors. Most destructively, it is projected outward. The world becomes a screen for our own disowned darkness, and we engage in endless futile battles with the enemies who are merely carrying our own faults. The moral decision to withdraw these projections and bear the knowledge of our own darkness is the apprentice-piece of wholeness. It is also an act of profound social responsibility. As Jung knew, the failure of individuals to integrate their personal shadow is what provides the psychological fuel for collective evils like scapegoating, prejudice, and war. If one passes this first test, a second, more subtle danger arises: psychological inflation. Inflation occurs when the ego, having made contact with the powerful, numinous energy of an archetype, doesn't relate to it but identifies with it. The ego gets puffed up, stealing the fire of the gods and claiming it as its own. This leads to a grandiose sense of self-importance, a messianic conviction that one has found the ultimate truth and is now superior to ordinary mortals. This state, as St. Paul warned, is when knowledge puffeth up. Paradoxically, Jung saw inflation as a regression into unconsciousness. The ego loses its most vital faculty, the ability to discriminate between I and not I. It becomes hypnotized by its own perceived greatness and is no longer capable of learning. Inflation is a spiritual bypass, an ego trick to avoid the true, humbling work of forming a conscious relationship with the self. This state is inherently unstable. The grandiosity is always compensated by a deep-seated feeling of inferiority, and it inevitably leads to a painful crash into depression and worthlessness that is as extreme as the inflation was high. The only antidote is the conscious cultivation of humility, a constant remembering of one's human limitations. The third great obstacle is pervasive and multifaceted: resistance. Resistance is the ego's natural defense against any unconscious material that threatens its stability, its control, and its current worldview. The unconscious is a paradoxical realm of opposites, creative and destructive, divine and demonicant. The ego is terrified of it. This fear manifests as procrastination, denial, intellectualization, sudden boredom with the inner work, or anger at the process. Jung made a crucial observation here. The unconscious will take to you the attitude you take to it. The more negative and resistant your conscious attitude, the more monstrous and frightening the face of the unconscious will appear. But resistance is not just a barrier, it is a signpost. The points of our strongest resistance are precisely where the most important work lies. The ego defends most fiercely the territory that, if integrated, would most profoundly transform it. The resistance, therefore, points to the treasure hard to attain. The task is not to smash the resistance, but to understand it, to honor its protective function, and to gently negotiate a passage. These perils, the shadow, inflation, and resistance, are not signs that the journey has gone wrong. They are the guardians of the threshold. They are the dragons that test the hero's worthiness. Overcoming them requires not brute force, but courage, humility, and a persistent, conscious commitment to the truth of one's own whole being. As the journey of individuation deepens, and the ego learns to navigate the obstacles of the inner world, a new and more profound level of experience begins to unfold. The relationship between the inner and outer worlds starts to shift in mysterious and meaningful ways. This is the stage of mastery, where the fruits of the great work begin to ripen. The most remarkable phenomenon to emerge at this stage is synchronicity. Jung coined this term to describe a meaningful coincidence, an event where the inner world of thought, dream, or feeling aligns with an outer world event in a way that cannot be explained by cause and effect, but which is profoundly significant. This is the universe whispering that you are on the right path. Jung developed this radical concept, his acausal connecting principle, in collaboration with the Nobel Prize-winning quantum physicist Wolfgang Pauli. They speculated that psyche and matter might not be separate realities, but two aspects of a deeper, unified reality, a non-us mundus, or one world. From this view, synchronicity is a glimpse into that underlying order. The classic example from Jung's practice involved a patient who was stuck in a rigid, overly rational mindset. She recounted a dream in which she was given a golden scarab. At that exact moment, Jung heard a tapping on his window, opened it, and caught a rose-chafer beetle, the closest European equivalent to a scarab, which he then presented to his patient. This impossible, irrational event shattered her intellectual defenses and opened her to the reality of the psyche, allowing her transformation to begin. Synchronicities are not mere chance. They are meaningful signs from the self, which, as the organizing principle of the total reality, can arrange outer events to resonate with our inner state. They tend to cluster during periods of profound transformation, acting as guideposts from the cosmos. This mastery also involves a final, paradoxical shift in the relationship between the ego and the self. The ultimate goal of individuation is the realization of the self as the true center of the personality. This does not mean the destruction of the ego. On the contrary, the journey requires a strong, stable ego, one capable of withstanding the onslaught of the unconscious without disintegrating. The ego must be built up, strengthened, and made resilient, but this leads to the final and most crucial step, what has been called the defeat of the ego. The newly strengthened ego, proud of its accomplishments, must perform a conscious act of surrender. It must recognize that it is not the master of the psychic universe, but a servant to a higher transpersonal authority within the self. This is the ultimate paradox. The ego must become strong enough to willingly subordinate itself. It transitions from being a fearful tyrant, desperately trying to control everything, to a loyal and trusted viceroy, carrying out the will of the true monarch, the self. This is the hallmark of the individuated personality. Life is no longer driven by the ego's short-sighted agenda of fear, control, and acquisition. It becomes guided by the self's agenda of meaning, wholeness, and connection. There is a sense of being part of a larger drama, of being lived by a purpose greater than one's own personal desires. This doesn't mean life becomes easy or free of conflict. The self contains all opposites, light and dark, joy and sorrow, and to be whole is to hold the tension of these opposites within a larger, more conscious container. But the struggle is no longer a meaningless affliction. It is part of a sacred, creative process. The individual finds their proper place in the cosmos, acting as a conscious conduit through which the self can realize itself in the world. This is the ultimate mastery, not a mastery over life, but a mastery of the art of living in conscious, humble, and courageous partnership with the soul. What does a life look like after crossing this irreversible threshold? What is the afterpicture of a soul that has embarked on the journey of individuation? It is not a life free from pain, challenge, or darkness. It is a life lived with a new depth, a new resilience, and a new and unshakable sense of meaning. The transformation is profound and touches every aspect of one's being. The first and most palpable change is the awakening of intuition. As the wall between the conscious and unconscious becomes more permeable, the quiet, guiding voice of the self becomes clearer and more trustworthy. Decisions are no longer solely the product of frantic, logical calculation or a desperate seeking of external approval. There is an inner compass, a calm certainty that arises from the core of one's being, pointing the way toward what is truly aligned. Even if it defies conventional wisdom, this inner certainty gives rise to a profound sense of detachment. This is not the cold indifference of one who doesn't care, but the warm, liberated peace of one who is no longer attached to specific outcomes, having found a center of gravity within the self. The desperate clinging to people, roles, and situations for a sense of security falls away. You learn to allow life to unfold, to trust its mysterious rhythms, to release the impossible burden of control. This is a conscious act of love and trust that brings an incredible lightness and freedom to the soul. Your very perception of time and reality begins to shift. Life is no longer experienced as a frantic, linear race against the clock, but as a rich, interconnected tapestry. You begin to see the symbolic dimension of everyday events, to recognize the unseen threads that connect past, present, and future in a meaningful whole. The pressure to rush subsides, replaced by a sacred patience, an honoring of the soul's own timing for each phase of its unfolding. This leads to the emergence of an authentic sense of purpose. This purpose is not an ambition imposed by society or the ego, but an inner calling that arises from your deepest essence. You are no longer driven by shoulds and oughts, but are moved by a mission that feels uniquely and profoundly your own. Every action, every choice, becomes an expression of this inner truth, weaving a life of integrity, passion, and coherence. Finally, this inner transformation radiates outward, reshaping your relationships and your world. By integrating your own shadow, you stop projecting it onto others, allowing for empathy and genuine connection to flourish. You relate to people as they are, not as you need them to be. Your energy changes. It becomes more refined, more authentic, and it naturally attracts people and experiences that resonate with this new, higher frequency. You develop a personal mythology, a unique narrative that gives meaning to your entire life's journey, its triumphs and its wounds. You become more resilient, able to navigate life's inevitable difficulties with a centered and balanced mindset. Because you understand that even the most painful experiences are sacred opportunities to evolve. This is the life of wholeness. It is a life where every moment is intentional, where presence is sacred, and where the connection to the wisdom of the self is constantly renewed. You have crossed a point of no return, and in that surrender lies the quiet, unshakable power of your own awakened soul. The legacy of Carl Jung is not a rigid doctrine or a set of easy answers. It is a courageous and profound invitation. It is an invitation to turn away from the noise of the outer world and embark on the most essential journey of a human life, the journey to meet one's own soul. He provided us with a map, a language, and a set of tools to navigate the vast, mysterious, and powerful territory of the inner world. He taught us that our neuroses are not just illnesses, but symptoms of a soul's yearning for wholeness. He showed us that our dreams are not random nonsense, but vital messages from a deeper intelligence. He revealed that within each of us lies a dark shadow that must be faced, a soul image that must be honored, and a divine center, the self that is our ultimate guide, Jung's work is a powerful antidote to the spiritual crisis of our time. In an age of mass movements, political fanaticism, and a pervasive sense of alienation, he reminds us that the only true and lasting transformation begins within the individual. The great project of our time is not to fix the world, but to do the difficult, personal work of becoming whole, an individuated person, one who has grappled with their own darkness and found an unshakable source of meaning within, is a bulwark against the tide of collective delusion. They have no need for the hollow promises of ideologies because they are anchored in the authority of their own soul. As Jung himself concluded, if things go wrong in the world, this is because something is wrong with the individual, because something is wrong with me. Therefore, if I am sensible, I shall put myself right first. You have journeyed with me through this deep path, crossing the irreversible threshold that transforms the very essence of your being. Recognizing these signs, the call of intuition, the freedom of detachment, the clarity of purpose is to embrace your own truth. It is to accept the quiet strength that arises from a life lived in alignment with the soul. This awakening is not an endpoint, but the true beginning of a fulfilling life, where every step resonates with the deep, silent music of your own unique and sacred being. And so, we arrive not at an end, but at a quiet beginning, a place of deep and gentle stillness. The path of individuation does not culminate in a final, triumphant arrival, but rather dissolves into a continuous, graceful unfolding, like a river meeting the endless expanse of the sea. The great work is to learn to live in this flow, to trust the current even when its destination is not yet visible, knowing it is guided by a wisdom far greater than our own. Let the insights from this journey settle not as rigid knowledge in the mind, but as a soft, warm light in the heart, a gentle hum of recognition that you are, and have always been, connected to something vast, ancient, and profoundly meaningful. Allow yourself to move forward from this moment with courage and with a deep and abiding compassion for your own becoming, knowing that the threshold you have crossed was never a barrier, but a doorway into the truest, most authentic expression of your life. Your inner light is invincible, and your path, in all its unique and winding beauty, is sacred.